You're listening to Witch Wednesdays, your weekly podcast source for all things witchcraft in the modern world. Join your hosts, Steph and Tara, every Wednesday morning as they dive into a new witchy topic.
Welcome back to Witch Wednesdays. This is Steph.
And this is Tara.
And you're listening to episode 10, Books for Beginners.
Yay! I love books.
We have a lot of books to recommend, so we decided to split it into two podcast episodes. Today is going to be all about beginner books and some intermediary ones that contain a lot of general information. So then next week, we will discuss all of our recommendations for either more advanced reading and also for books specific to certain types of witches and witchcraft that are just more specific instead of these broad general ones we're talking about today.
Yep.
So before we jump in, we want to give a shout out to one of our listeners, Allison. She reached out on Instagram and book recommendations was one of her episode ideas. So thank you, Allison. Her Instagram handle is Allison_Wonderland08 if you want to go check her out.
And I just want to brag her or force her to listen or anything.
I know.
That was super exciting for both of us.
It was very exciting. It's a very exciting day.
It was.
So I am going to let Tara take it away with her list of beginner books. I'll jump in if I have anything to add, and then we will get to my list.
So I want to preface this by saying that I read all of these beginner books a long time ago, and the ones I'm recommending are all the ones I kept. So I read probably several dozen books within the span of, I don't know, a few months. And these are the ones that I found to be the most useful, that I was referencing a lot. And so I've kept them to this day. So I still have all of these books. So keep in mind that general knowledge never goes out of style. Like, even if as advanced as you get, it's still good to go back and look at these once in a while. So with that, I will just start at the top. And unlike Steph, these are not alphabetical. So you're welcome, world. These are in no particular order, except these are literally the order I found them in. So it starts with A Complete Book of Witchcraft by Raymond Buckland. This book is amazing. It goes into so many different things. And when I first read it, I found it really, really fun that it's an unusual size book. Like, it's a strange, bright blue, and it's larger than normal, but it has so much in it. I really recommend this for anyone just getting started. It touches on so many different things. And then if you're interested in anything, it recommends other books and other ways that you can look more deeply into any topic in it.
This is one that's recommended across the board. If you talk to a lot of witches and you ask for their beginner recommendations, they're going to recommend this one, and they're going to call it Big Blue. So just so you know,
it's huge and it's blue.
Yeah, the size and color, that's what it's called. This is called Big Blue. Witches know this one. So if you ever hear it referred to,
I still have it. And then this one, it's a little harder to get through, but again, really good knowledge, and I still have it. I really like it. I apologize because I know I'm going to mispronounce the last name, so I should just say I'm going to mispronounce a lot of words. Sorry about that. But A Witch's Bible, The Complete Witch's Handbook by Janet and Stuart Farrar, Farrar. This one, it's not as easy to read as A Complete Book of Witchcraft, but it has, again, so much knowledge. It doesn't reference as much other works, but it definitely tells you a lot of basics, and it gives you really good insight on where you can go and seek additional knowledge. It just doesn't reference as many other books as Big Blue.
And this is another one that pretty much all witches have heard of and recommend. And I'm going to put this disclaimer out there. I don't know that I need to, but this book is not for minors. And
no.
I don't know that I need to put that out there because I don't think we have any listeners that are minors because their content, we swear a lot. We're really not meant for a minor audience. But the reason I say that is because this book does talk about sky-clad rituals, and it does have the imagery in it. So there's naked people in this book. So I feel like I have to put that out there that, like, this is not for minors. Or, you know, if you're offended by those things, like there's naked men and women in this book. So I feel like I should just let you know that, and then you can decide for yourself whether that's something you want to read or not.
As a 15-year-old, I found it fascinating. But again,
so maybe minors will like it even more.
I found it fascinating, but because it goes into so much depth about ceremonies and things like that, it is harder to just read through. Like a complete book of witchcraft it's not an easy read, but it flows very nicely and the word choice is easy. This one, not so much. It's very in-depth.
Yes.
Think encyclopedia.
It's very much like you want to kind of know what you're looking for and then find it in the book and read that section that you want to reference.
Yes, it's a lot more like that. An encyclopedia of knowledge. It's very dense. Then Wicca, A Guide for the Solitary Practitioner by Scott Cunningham. It's brilliant. Scott Cunningham, when we get into advanced stuff, I'll have more recommendations from him. I find his writing style completely easy to read, easy to absorb. I really like it. This really helped me discover that I was not for the coven lifestyle. He has a lot of good suggestions also for rituals that you can modify and how to modify spells and things to do by yourself, even if they're originally written for a coven. So I recommend this one if you want to look into the solitary path. Even if you are coven-based and you want to be coven-based, it's still an interesting read just to kind of see what the differences are. Next up is The Craft, A Witch's Book of Shadows by Dorothea Morrison. This really helped me in how I set up my book of shadows. It talks about ways to set up books of shadows, what you should and should not put in one. Basically, anything you feel should be in it, and anything you don't feel should be in it, leave out. But again, really easy, really interesting. It wasn't as easy to read as Scott Cunningham or Raymond Buckland, but it flows really nicely and it has a ton of knowledge. So recommend that one if you're thinking of setting up your book of shadows, just because it does help a lot in what can you put in it, what should you put in it, what's important to record. It has a lot of ideas and suggestions. It even has like kind of writing prompts almost, like, so I found it very helpful. Next up is Lisa Chamberlain's Wicca for Beginners. This one is religious based. The other ones are not as religion based versus witchcraft. This one's much more based for religion. So if you want to explore the religious side of witchcraft, I would recommend this one. If you are more like Steph and you're just secular, you might want to leave this one off your reading list. It's a lot more into the religious base than any of these other ones I've recommended so far. Next up, this is a partial recommendation. So I read this and I still have it. And when I was prepping for this, I reread it and I did not like it as an adult. But as a child, Silver Ravenwolf, Teen Witch was mind-blowing to me. It's easy to read. It's easy to understand. Going back as an adult to read it, she's so condescending. Like she has all the knowledge and you know nothing. So as someone who did know nothing, I love this book. As someone who's been practicing for 20 years, I did not. So keep that in mind. That's a partial recommendation. If you're completely new to the craft, she has so much knowledge to share. But if you have done any exploring, you might not like her style. Then one book that came up, and I don't know why I've never read this, but I wanted to just put it out there. The Spiral Dance by Starhawk is considered a classic. I've never read it. I don't know why. I know lots of people have read it. It's been recommended. I have a copy that I've kept. I've just never made it all the way through. This book is really interesting because it's set up in a series of lessons. So it really helps you develop your own personal practice through 13 lessons over 13 moons. So it's a lot more personal and exploratory. And it recently had a 20th anniversary edition come out, which just has kind of a new foreword and some reworking of a few lessons, but it's still divided up into 13 lessons. And it really helps you find your own personal path. But I seriously, I've never read it, but I hear only great things. So I wanted to put it out there because I don't know why I haven't read it since I own it. So those are my main recommendations for beginner books. These are not the ones that are going to go into super a lot of depth. They touch on a lot of things, and most of these books will recommend other books if you want more in-depth knowledge, which is always what I recommend at the beginning. Do the broad before you try to dive in, because it's really going to help you later on find your personal path versus, oh, this is the path so-and-so gave me this spell and I have to do it on this day, this way, with this ingredient. That's not how witchcraft works. So
Agreed.
So Steph, what are your beginner books?
All right. So I have my list, and same as Tara, that these are definitely broad for beginners. I think they're a really good place to start. So the very first one that I always recommend is Before You Cast a Spell by Carl McColman. And it is the starter book of starter books. And most people crucify it for that, but I will live and die by this recommendation. And I feel like it's similar to the one that you were talking about, Tara, of the Silver Raven Wolf. That
yes.
He is, when you read it and you're not a beginner, he can seem extremely condescending. So you should know that going into it. But I still recommend this for beginners because I think it's essential for learning the basics of spell work, ritual, and magic in general, which we touched on before in like previous podcast episodes, that you have to build up. You don't just like jump into spell work. You have to know what's going on behind it, the what's and the why. And this is a great book for that. And you're not going to find any spell work in it. It's not even an option. You have to learn all of this background things like, energy manipulation and centering, grounding, things that we've talked about like that. So I think that's like, this is the basic place to start.
Yes.
And a lot of people hate it for that because they're like, why doesn't have any like useful information? I'm like, it is useful. It is useful. You have to crawl before you can walk.
You have to sit up before you do this.
Yes, exactly. So I die by that recommendation. The next one on my list is Spellcasting Beyond the Basics by Michael Fiore. And this would be the supplement to Before You Cast a Spell. And I think that's what people expect the other book to be, which is why they dislike it so much. So Spellcasting Beyond the Basics is kind of laid out how this podcast is. It covers a little bit of everything, from correspondence to zodiac associations to working with the elements, like all of those things it touches on. So it's really great foundation. And it does have, like spell work and things in there. So I think that this would be like the good supplement and the next like step to read after reading Before You Cast a Spell. But I think people expect Before You Cast a Spell to have all of these other things that spellcasting does. So read them together and then you'll be less disappointed.
And if you are disappointed, she's still going to stand by her recommendation.
Yeah, I totally am. The next one on my list is Besom, Stang, and Sword by Christopher Orapello and Tara Love McGuire. I grouped this in books for beginners just because of the breadth of information that it has. But it's probably not the very first place you should start because the authors dive right in with the go do this mindset. Whereas the other ones are laying the foundation and, here's the why behind it. Whereas this one is like, oh, you want to be a witch? Okay, here's the things that you do. Here are the steps you take. So I wouldn't start here. But it's still very easy to understand. And although it talks about traditional regional witchcraft, it specifically does it in a way that doesn't follow Wicca or the Wheel of the Year, which is why I really like it. It's all about adapting witchcraft for a more modern era and using what's around you, because the Wheel of the Year and those influences, like we talked about with the Inbulk podcast, and we have more episodes on all the Sabbats coming up, but they follow that whole Wheel of the Year that's based around the harvest season. But the fact is that most of us are not farmers anymore. So I think a traditional way to, celebrate the harvest is, harvesting like the first like wheat crop and breaking bread out of it. It's like a traditional way to celebrate Lammas and like all of those. Well, we're not doing that. We're not farmers anymore. So we're not out there, tilling all these crops. So
Hopefully not.
And so this book focuses on the ways that you can, no matter where you are, it's not specific to a particular region, but it focuses on all the different ways that you can make it work for you with things that you find in your own backyard. So it still has a very traditional aspect of witchcraft and working with nature and things, but it's adaptable to wherever you are, whatever time of year it is, which I think is a really interesting read.
So if you are interested in the more religious aspect of the Wheel of the Year, I'm just going to throw in a recommendation. Guide to the Wiccan Year by Judy Ann Nock, N-O-C-K. That has a more religious view of the year, but it has a lot of similar information, I think, to this one. It's just a little less secular. And if you're not sure which kind of witch you want to be, I would highly recommend reading them together just to kind of see what the differences are.
That's a great idea.
Thanks. Sometimes I have them.
The next one on my list is Wikipedia by Shawn Robbins and Liana Greenway. And you've probably seen this because this one has been around a lot, especially lately. The re-released version is a black book with foiled green lettering. So it's all over Instagram because it's aesthetically pleasing.
It's very pretty.
And
it really is pretty.
I know that's not a reason to like a book, but it helped because I have so little out in my minimalist house. So what does get displayed gets noticed, and it needs to be pretty. And I make no apologies about that because there are a lot of astrological signs that are aesthetically driven, including Scorpio and Libra, which is what Tara and I are. So
yes.
It's not shallow and it's not unimportant. I feel like that's a legitimate reason to like a book is that it's pretty. But Wikipedia, obviously Wicca based. But I think that that's good because you can't really learn all about witchcraft without getting some Wicca knowledge in there. And even if you aren't going to follow the Wiccan tradition, I think it's still good to know. It's good to have a background in basics, and you don't necessarily know right off the bat if you like it or you don't. So I feel like this is a really good resource for people who are just starting out and not necessarily Wiccan, haven't decided whether or not they're going to be. This is a good way to learn about it.
It's kind of, again, with the foundational, like we've talked about the different types of witches and all of this, you kind of have to know the more broad before you can narrow in on your path.
Yes, exactly. And I feel like this is it's another one that's a really good resource book to come back to, and you're able to know, if you know what you're looking for, you can go and find that certain section and read more about that. Yep, which is just a nice book to have on your bookshelf. The next one on my list is The Modern Guide to Witchcraft by Skyy Alexander. And I think this is a really fun read for new witches. It does have a few spells in it, but it mostly focuses on the what and why of witchcraft rather than the action. And it's, unlike the other ones, not very Wicca based. It's just witchcraft in general. And it's a very quick read. It's something that you would sit down and read like from cover to cover because I find it's really interesting, really fun. I say for new witches, but I think it's a good read for anybody. But yes, lots of basics, but fun to read.
I read this one not as a basic book, and she's completely right. It's written almost like a fiction novel. Like it's that entertaining.
Yeah. I've known a lot of people who pick it up and like read these sections or reference it, and they read it from cover to cover without putting it down. Like,
yeah, it's very entertaining.
Fun.
It's a really well written book.
Yeah, it's like a lighthearted. There's some witch books, even ones on this list where it kind of gets like deep on you.
I would like to reference A Witch's Bible again. That is like the encyclopedia of heavy.
Yeah, some of that gets deep. But this is just lighthearted and fun. It's a great read. I like it a lot. And the last one on my list is that you may or may not have heard of is Wicca by Harmony Nice. So if you are involved or follow the witchcraft community on YouTube, or you follow a lot of witches, you are definitely going to have come across Harmony Nice because she's probably one of the biggest Wicca YouTubers. She is based in the UK, and she has, it's not, her channel isn't totally Wicca based. It's not like all of her videos, but she has specific ones that are based on the traditions that she follows, and they're all super interesting. She has just a great way of speaking and explaining things. Like, she's just so sweet. And a lot of people don't like books written by YouTubers or other influencers because they think it won't contain real knowledge, or that you just, like, got a book deal by having a lot of followers. But I actually think that makes them uniquely accessible, because you can put a face to what you're reading and then be able to go to her channel and learn even more. So I went into reading this having watched her YouTube channel, just kind of thinking that this would be repetitive, either of what's on her channel or just like something like fun to read. But it actually contains a ton of information. It's a really good book. It's well written. It is written how she talks, so you're definitely going to know that it's her, and I think that's a really nice quality. But it has a lot of good information on Wicca. Like, I don't think you should write this book off just because it's written by a YouTuber. Like, she did her research. She practices what she preaches. It's definitely it's got a good flow and a good story, so it's not so much of as an encyclopedia as some of the other ones are, but I think it's a really fun read as well.
And when you're first getting started, don't underestimate the fun reads. You're still getting knowledge. It's just easier to absorb sometimes. Like, the encyclopedia ones, yes, I've had them for decades. Like, they're good references, but they're not the easiest to just sit and read as a beginner.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that covers everything on my list. How about you, Tara?
So I have more, but as you said, we're going to break this up. So I think the other ones kind of get more deep dive into things. So I will save them for next time.
That's a good idea, because we already have like 20 minutes of beginner book recommendations. So
also, there's that.
So we don't want to completely overwhelm you. But if you have any questions, or if, I know sometimes it's hard when we're just speaking, if you are missed, what the book was called or how to spell the author's name or something, because you want to find it, just reach out to us on Instagram, Witch Wednesdays Podcast. You can email us at witchwednesdayspodcast@gmail.com. And we can basically just give you the list of everything that we talked about in case you want to go find any of these.
I just want to point out that this time I was the Steph, and I had my list ready to go, broken up by type of recommendation, type of book, and everything. And I made Steph add her books to mine.
Yes, Tara was completely prepared for this one. And
yeah,
that's very her. She is the bookworm out of the two of us.
I was like, these are literally the order I'm going to go in, and these are...
And you better get on board.
Yes. Just want to point that out.
Well, that is all we have for you this week for episode 10, but we will see you next week, episode 11, for even more book recommendations.
Yay! I'm so excited. I have more.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Witch Wednesdays with Steph and Tara. Love our content? Consider donating at anchor.fm/witch-wednesdays to help keep our podcast up and running. Please leave us a voicemail on that same site if you have any questions or comments, and follow us on Instagram at Witch Wednesdays Podcast.